Lately I've been thinking about doing some more excerpts for you. I used to do this thing called Teaser Tuesday where I would give an excerpt of whatever I was currently reading so that you could kind of get a feel for the style and the tone and decide if it was something that you want to pick up. I really do like giving excerpts for you guys because, I don't know about you, but for me, if I'm browsing a bookstore, the first thing I do if a book intrigues me is open to the first page and read a little bit and see if the style catches me. So I think having something like that can really help, and sometimes things that you don't think that you wanted to read, once you hear the language and the style and just the voice of the whole thing, might actually draw you in and make you want to read it. So I figured, since I have a whole stack of ALA books that I need to feature in some way, and I have some books that I know I'm not going to be able to feature on the channel in another way, I figured I would go ahead and do excerpts of them. So, to kick things off, I'm going to start with a book that I just finished and loved, Antigoddess by Kendare. The whole synopsis as well as links to the book can be found in the info, so I'm just going to go straight for the beginning, which, in my opinion, is fantastic. Caught me right off the bat. The first chapter, Owl Feathers. The feathers were starting to be a nuisance. There was one in her mouth, tickling the back of her throat. She chewed at it as she walked, grabbed it with her molars and pulled it loose. Warm, copper penny blood flooded over her tongue. There were others too, sprouting up inside of her like a strange cancer, worming their way through her innards and muscle. Before long, she would be essentially a girl-shaped walking chicken, constantly plucking at herself. She reached between her lips discreetly to take the feather out and twist it between her fingers. The movement wasn't subtle enough. She caught the tilt of his head at the edge of her vision. "Fucking feathers," she snapped. "You should stop making out with your owls." "I get lonely." Neither of them wanted to talk about the feathers, any more than they wanted to talk about the way he was starting to look thin and gaunt in places. It was easier to ignore the afflictions than to talk about what they meant. So they just walked, in the same direction that they had been walking for 3 days already, under the damned sun, in the middle of a damned desert, looking for the last of she who used to be called the Mother of the Earth. "We should stop," he said. The distance of his voice told her he already had. Her legs kept moving, dark denim hot against her knees, for another 5 paces, just to make a point before she kicked at the dry sand, flinging up dust and small stones, and probably pissing off a lizard somewhere. "She's here." "How do you know?" he asked. "I want water." She tossed him the leather cask without looking, and listened to the slow slosh as he drank. He threw it back, and she took a swallow, felt another owl feather making its way into her windpipe, a sore fluttering spot when the water passed over it. The water was unpleasant too, lukewarm and dust-flavored. She stretched her arms and stared up into the sun. "It's a good thing we don't sunburn." When they left the desert, they'd be the same shade they were when they started, despite yards of exposed skin. She glanced at his jeans, his tight t-shirt, and at her own tattooed wrists and thin black tank top. A shadow passed overhead. A buzzard. She snorted. Look, he probably thinks we're a couple of lost rave kids. A quick meal. Won't he be disappointed? He turned shielded eyes to the sky and chuckled. Will he? I wish we had come from a rave. Next time you drag me to the middle of a desert, it had better be for music and glow sticks. Not some goddess who's probably not even here. Give me that disgusting water back. She is here. Can't you feel her? She doesn't have the energy to hide. She tossed the water to him, and he crouched down to rest, the leather of water hanging loosely down to the dirt. When he shook his head, a cloud of dust fell out of his close-cropped brown hair. "I can't feel anything," he said, "except the blasted sun and the weariness that shouldn't be there." She watched him. Hermes, the god of thieves, an eternal 17-year-old bitching like an old man. It was almost funny. It would have been, if they weren't both dying, and he hadn't been so thin. The muscles in his arms were becoming sinewy, and his cheeks had hollows they hadn't had before. He must have lost 5 pounds just since they reached the desert. "You should eat something." She knelt in the dirt beside him and took off her pack. There was dried beef inside, and fruit. "This is humiliating," he muttered, as she handed him the food. "Death without glory always is. Of course, I never thought it would happen to us." She swallowed again, and the pin of the feather poked her. She took another drink of water. In the old days, she would have been able to wish the feather right out of existence, to burn it up with a thought, into nothing but a hiss and a curl of smoke. It was still hard to believe that this would be her end. They would be so quiet and slow, her lungs filling up with feathers. It would be like breathing through a pillow. She wouldn't even be able to scream. We should have seen it coming. It's not as though it hasn't been foretold and written about. The twilight of the gods. He scraped up a handful of dust and tossed it into the air. He arched his brow. Dust in the wind? Funny. Everything born must die, Athena. So says convention. She pushed herself back up and squinted into the harsh light. For as far as she could see, everything looked the same. Cactuses cropped up in strange little families. Tumbleweeds rolled along on their way to nowhere. It was flat and barren, and the last place she wanted to be, dying in the middle of a desert. She held out her hand and pulled him up. Everything born must die, she repeated. But I sprang fully formed from our father's head, so that doesn't exactly count now, does it? So that was the first chapter of Antigoddess by Kendare. This book comes out in September, and I would highly recommend that if it's not already on your wish list or your pre-order list or your library request list, it should be put there ASAP. That's all for now, but keep an eye out for more excerpts, and as always, happy reading!